by nature, explorers. The same curiosity that sends us to the stars at the speed of thought urges us to go there in reality. And whenever we make a great new leap, we elevate humanity, bring people and nations together, usher in new discoveries and new technologies. So remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet.
Right, hello and welcome to Saturday. It's the weekend. Now, Saturday is purely Roman in origin. Most of the other ones are kind of Norse or the Old English language or Germanic or things like that. This one is purely Roman and it comes from their god of wealth. So Kronos was a Roman god and he used to eat his own children because I think there was some sort of fable or prophecy that one of his kids would rise up and take the throne from him. So he used to eat them as babies, which is a bit strange. And this is kind of like Zeus was pulled, because Zeus was Kronos' son. He was pulled from the bosom of his mum and taken down to earth and hidden away so his father couldn't eat him. And that's how the Milky Way was made as well. As he was pulled from the bosom, the milk of life flowed all across the sky and created the Milky Way. But that's another story. So, Saturn. Saturn is probably the planet you would think of if you were asked to draw one, because it's got an amazing ring system. We all know this. It's got cool rings all around it. And when I go out and do the actual astronomy, I always call it the crowd pleaser at events, because once someone sees it through a telescope for real, they always look up with their mouths agape, just like, oh my god, that's a planet. So yeah, most people will draw a planet as Saturn with its rings. Now, although it's the second largest planet, Saturn is actually one of the least dense, meaning that if you could actually find a bed of water big enough, well, I say a bed, more like a bath of water big enough, the planet would actually float in there, so it's not really very dense. Now, like Jupiter, it is mostly hydrogen with 3% helium, and it spins in around 10.7 hours, so that's not far off Jupiter's spin as well. And this causes the planet to bulge also. So in the middle, it's around 10% wider at the equator than it is at the other parts, so the top and the bottom, of the north and south. And that's because its fast spin kind of bulges and pushes the equator out. Now, Saturn takes just under 30 years to orbit the Sun. So in a lifetime we might see maybe 3 times orbit the Sun. Hopefully more if you're lucky. Because the planet is tilted in its axis, as we orbit and it orbits, we actually get to see different views of its rings. So sometimes you'll see they're tilted towards us, sometimes they're sort of tilted to the side. I say sometimes like it's tipping its hat to you. And rarely, it's very rarely from what I've heard, sometimes the rings are actually kind of flat on. So as you're looking straight at them, it's almost like it has no rings, they've disappeared because they're so thin. And if that ever happens, it'd be so cool to see the Saturn without rings. It would just be like a normal planet flying out there. Sometimes you get to see the shadow of the planet that actually covers part of the main rings. So you can see the shadow going across and covering it behind where the sun's shining across. It's really cool to see. The rings stretch from around about 46,390 million miles to 84,991 million miles. But at places, they actually can be only 3 meters thick. So although they're huge and millions of miles wide, the thickness of them is actually really thin. They're really, really, really thin. Although it does have fainter rings that stretch out much further from the planet, but those ones we can't really see. Now, the rings are thought to perhaps have been a moon which maybe broke apart, and it was very thinly spread out around the planet, being made mostly of dirty water ice. The rings are really reflective, so that's why we see them so well and we get these fantastic views of the ring system that's there. So it's pretty much like snowballs, really, flying around in space. Some are like the size of pebbles, others the size of boulders, and there's even moons there as well. They call them shepherd moons. and they seem to almost kind of like herd the rings together. Now they did send a probe there, or a spaceship called Cassini, and when it went there it actually found all of these moons inside the rings. Some are going inside the rings and collecting up some of the ring system. Some of them are actually spraying like cryonic, so it's like a volcano, a geyser sort of thing. Instead of doing lava, it's like frozen, like really cold water and all sorts of other chemicals, ammonia and stuff like that, maybe all being sprayed out, and that might create some of the rings as it goes around. So maybe that's actually something that's created it, and NASA went there to have a look. Now Saturn is the last planet that you can see in the night sky just using your eyes. Any more onwards from this, you're going to need at least binoculars, probably a telescope to see. So you can see all of the main planets up to Saturn just using your eyes in the sky. Even with binoculars, like 10 by 50s are great. You can, well, with a steady hand, you'll be able to make out the rings. It'll be very small, but you will be able to see Saturn and its rings just using binoculars. With a telescope, you may even be able to spot its large moon Titan, which orbits around the planet as well. It's one of the few moons in the solar system that actually has a thick atmosphere, and it has lakes of like methane, ethane, all sorts of things like that. So it actually looks like it's got continents and lakes, but they're very, very different to the ones on Earth. They're not really very good for you. So back to Cassini. When NASA sent the probe there, this spaceship or probe, it did about, I think it was around 27 to 30 orbits. And when it orbited, it went right out far in orbit, then came flying back towards the planet and went in between the gap between the planet and the first ring. So it's really crazy orbit, flung right out and went right back in again in between this gap. And it was kind of just trying to find out what the rings were made of. They got loads of data from it, found out what they were, and they found that the rings are actually kind of falling into the planet. So there's almost like a thin line all around the equator of the planet where these rings are actually getting pulled into Saturn itself. So it might actually rain Saturn's rings down on you when you're actually in the planet, who knows. So that means that one day, if it's pulling the rings into it in its orbit, they might disappear. So a little bit like Jupiter's red spot, we know, if you've listened to that, is slowly unraveling and getting smaller and smaller. Maybe all the other planets had ring systems at one point, but they've just been sucked in orbit and all pulled together and, you know, disappeared into the planet. And that's what Cassini was trying to find out. So when they finished with Cassini and it did all its orbits and it was running out of fuel, NASA decided, let's do something cool, let's crash it into the planet. Now there is a reason why they do this. It's not because they're crazy and they just want to crash spaceships all the time. It's bacteria, as we know. Bacteria can survive quite a long time without water, in space and all this sort of stuff. So if there's any bacteria on that spaceship, if it does land somewhere or go out into, you know, space itself and find another race or land on a planet or do something there, it could kill any other life that we know out there, just like a cold or a virus or something like that. It could kill life out there that we don't know about, so we don't want to do that. We want to look after it. Also, if it does go onto the planet, it may create new life, which maybe will evolve and come back and kill us. So let's not do that either. So we try and protect it by burning it up in the atmosphere and sterilising it and looking after our solar system like we should be our planet. And the other reason they do this is because as it's burning up in the atmosphere of the planet, we get loads of information and data about its atmosphere and what it's made of and how it's working and all this sort of stuff. So there's actually two reasons why we do it. It's not just crazy, let's crash it because it's fun. We learn a lot of stuff about the planet, which is going to help us learn more about our planet. So, as I said, you can pop out, even with your eyes, you'll be able to see Saturn up in the sky. Binoculars, you might be able to make out its rings. And with a telescope, it'll be amazing. It'll be really, really good to see. So pop out there and see the spectacular rings planet. So clear skies, everybody. And remember, there's a billion worlds in your back garden.